Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 19 transfer plans. We're still in the midst of Gameweek 18. I'm on 46 points right now. We are on a green arrow. We have like a 1k green arrow, I think, so far. And we have Lafay to go, whereas the main threat left is going to be Guehi and an amalgamation of Leeds players, or even arguably, let's say, Mukiele, who, in terms of, let's say, Lafay's ability to produce a return, probably kind of synchronized in terms of you want a positive Sunderland game state. So not too worried about that, to be quite honest. We actually went for the Ekitike captain, which I think is the main reason why I'm on a green arrow right now. Because those additional 3 points were 3 points against the entire field, just because of, the difference between, let's say, Haaland being 180% owned and Ekitike being 80% owned. So that was pretty much fruitfully enjoyed. Could it have been a better haul? I mean, he hit the post early in the first half, but I have to be completely honest. Liverpool are not a good football team right now. They're obviously a good football team in the sense that they're placed relatively high on the table, and we obviously have great expectations for them. But I think just relative to those expectations, they just simply aren't. You look at, for example, I actually saw a graphic which was very interesting from Mark Stats, which looks at all the top teams within Europe this season and how they've managed winning game states. Most teams tend to play a little bit more conservatively, but then still continue to build the amount of chances up that they have, right? While sort of limiting the amount of chances they've conceded. However, Liverpool's like the only big team that actually regresses when they're in a winning game state. So they tend to throw leads, they tend to give more chances away, they tend to also create less chances. And when you look at, for example, other teams who have managed winning conditions, it's just not close. And when I was watching Ekitike in the second half, it just got worse. And then eventually he kind of did the Saka limp off the pitch, and hopefully he's fit for the next game. So that was a bit dismaying, all in all. Am I happy that I don't own Virgil van Dijk? Absolutely. So that's the only positive that I can take away from that. Otherwise, I think I was quite fortunate this week. We did go for Cunha over Wirtz, and I think that was a decision where we said, okay, Wirtz clearly has the better fixture here, but Cunha is going to have the same game. And at the end of the day, do I want to own Wirtz or Cunha going forwards? My decision was always going to be Cunha. So sometimes free transfers are sparse. I probably, let's say if we in hindsight were able to make transfers around Bruno and we knew Bruno was going to be injured, my moves would not have been the same moves that I made for Game Week 18. I did, excuse me, Lacroix to Keane, which has got me Keane's massive haul. I did the Lafay move in from Szoboszlai, so I took him out. I went Thiago into Ekitike, which I think because it's given me the captaincy points, I'm going to take that into my stride as well. I would not have, for example, considered a differential captain against Haaland had I, let's say, kept Thiago in my team. And there's also a lot of price rises associated with the move from Thiago to Ekitike, so I don't feel too bad about that. Saka's done well, was never transferring him out. Cunha's done nothing, but I'm okay with that. Semenyo, I was very fortunate to keep. So the reason why I own Semenyo in my team is because we found out about the Bruno injury later, and I ended up keeping him on my team. So that just shows you how in FPL this game is very much luck driven at times. I probably could have made better decisions with the full information of Game Week 18 and even the midweek fixtures around Richards and Hincapié. But I actually stand here owning Hincapié whilst Timber seems like he's injured. Calafiori got injured in the warm-up, and it seems like Hincapié now has roots towards starting several Arsenal matches in a row. So that's just how FPL unfolds sometimes, and it can be very, very lucky. I've used all my free transfers. If I didn't, for example, as I said, make free transfers early, I probably wouldn't. I probably would have still ended up with some sort of structure where I would have gone for Ekitike. But I think with the money that I have in the bank currently, which is 1.8 million, I probably would have actually just gone for Virgil instead of Keane. And it just shows you how crazy this game can be in terms of how disparate the swings are. And it's not to say that Everton played well, particularly versus Burnley. They conceded a lot of XG, but it just shows you how comfortable I feel not owning Virgil, I suppose, in the short term. And then actually really happy with how Hincapié has turned out as a transfer because he's started a lot more games than I thought. And the value on him still seems like it's there. For the rest of my team, though, Krupi Jr. did start, but I think was pretty much dismaying versus Brentford as a starter, then came off at halftime, so there's nothing to say there. Anderson and Dubravka, I mean, I benched Anderson again. I don't really think that I would have played Anderson over Hincapie or O'Reilly once again, reevaluating it. But has he done well recently on my bench? Absolutely, he has. Maybe I'll actually start him this week, and that's sort of the takeaway from this point. But I'll probably bench him again. Is the way that I think. If let's say Richards is going to be fine with Dubravka, I don't think there was a world where I really considered playing him, especially since I had moved into Keane anyways. You kind of were backing for an Everton result. Obviously, it's a 0-0, which is plausible. But I remember actually looking at how many 0-0s there are in the Premier League. And I think that only happens something, 2 to 5% of the time. So that's an extremely unlikely result in FPL. It's not something you really hope for, and you know that it's very unlikely, but it is plausible. So let's just see what Lefay can do, but that's kind of the team that I have. In terms of takeaways, I think in terms of like Triple City, the only thing that's a bit dismaying is you guys know that I'm an extremely big Turkey fan, and I am sad to miss out on a Turkey haul as much as I am also an Nico O'Reilly fan. I just think Turkey is a better pick. It's unfortunate that I kind of moved into a structure where I required O'Reilly like quite a lot. Maybe on the flip side, I would probably not be too upset if I knew that I was going to keep Virgil the whole time if I had, let's say, pivoted out of O'Reilly. So you can't really regret too much. O'Reilly is still someone who's, a mainstay for the City team. So it can't be too bad. And then unfortunately, there's also a lot of depth coming into the City squad. So I think the big overarching discussion as we head in towards Game Week 19 is Semenyo, who's obviously rewarded me kindly once again this season. What do we do with someone like Semenyo, who very much looks like in a few days' time could be a Man City player? So when we actually look at the Game Week 19 slate before we sort of do the recap of the 18 games, sure, he could play versus Chelsea versus Bournemouth. I appreciate some of these local times here are going to be very odd to any UK viewers or people based in Europe, but I am currently recording from Hong Kong and trying my best to watch all the Premier League games that I can at these odd hours. But yeah, I mean, Chelsea versus Bournemouth would happen before the transfer window starts, which means that Semenyo most likely is going to play versus Chelsea. But after that, it's very hard to say what exactly is going to happen. I read some sort of BBC News reporting suggesting that Bournemouth would like to have Semenyo actually start versus Arsenal, which is going to be the home game in Game Week 19. But I think that Semenyo and his sort of management team actually want to have the deal concluded as early as possible, which means that that's unlikely to happen. However, it does seem promising in terms of he very likely is going to be available for Chelsea versus Bournemouth, and he's going to play in that match. Now, if we kind of look at precedent, there have been games previously where, for example, I think Eze right before he joined Arsenal was, not within the squad versus, actually, I think funnily enough, maybe Arsenal. We'll see what happens in terms of Semenyo going forwards. But I think the main takeaway there is that even if Semenyo was to join City, the problem for me would be that I own 4 City players. And I don't think his minutes would be perfect, to be honest, even though he might join City. So I think Semenyo kind of has to go as a transfer, at least this week or the week after that, which is part of the transfer plan theme. Otherwise, Gabriel's back in the game. So I think saving up the idea of having a free transfer, whether it's Hincapie or someone else into Gabriel, is something that I'm thinking about. And that's kind of the main sort of takeaway here. I think the rest of my team actually looks really good. In terms of like these are all very consistent players, good auto sub options in terms of an Anderson or a Richards if Richards is going to come back soon. And yeah, that's kind of my overarching thoughts. With Palmer getting subbed off reasonably early versus Aston Villa, I think the concern here is that you now have a player who plays 75 minutes potentially per match in a game week or a week rather that has 3 game weeks. So he might play good minutes versus Bournemouth, but it's unlikely going to be something where he's going to hit that sort of 90 minutes upper bound ceiling. And I think I probably will still stay away from Palmer for the meantime. When it pertains to Saka, I think the positive is that his minutes have looked incredible, right? Like playing full on 90 minutes has been massive. Maybe the concern is that in the midweek here, he could get rested, but I think Aston Villa at home is such a crucial, important game that I'm really struggling to believe that would even happen. The last time around that Arsenal did play versus Aston Villa, we did see a relatively early Saka substitution, which I think is going to happen, right? Because he is one of the players being run into the ground. It is more likely that he's going to get subbed off, and I think I'm mentally prepared for that. But I think generally the minutes for Saka have been a bit more impressive. So I don't necessarily see him as someone in my team who I think I need to transfer out immediately. So that's kind of my closing thoughts on my team. As far as, let's say, Game Week 18, just recapping, like if there were any takeaways for me, sure, I think, United looked a little bit worse, but they still built chances at least within the first half. I think Mount maybe actually not being a part of the team is going to be a problem, but fortunately, United's fixtures are incredibly good, and they're playing much easier teams than Newcastle, I would still say. With City and Forest, I think Ruben Diaz was super lucky to not get a red card. I'm kind of confused why he didn't, for the kind of tackle that he made. Otherwise, I think Forest actually looked really solid. But then it's, the context is I just benched Anderson the previous week, because I was kind of scared about Forest. And they looked relatively toothless, at Craven Cottage, but then actually played really well versus Man City. And part of that, I suppose, is City's defense is actually not as good as we think. Like, I've been making jokes about Virgil, but you can make jokes about City's defense. The clean sheets from the previous weeks where, let's say, Palace, were unable to score, and the other clean sheets, I think are sort of indicative that City probably overperformed over that run, as opposed to their defense is impeccable. Arsenal versus Brighton. Bit of an interesting game because I think Brighton set up in an extremely defensive manager, and managers tend to do this from time to time. So if you guys remember Game Week 14 when Brentford played versus Arsenal and they were away from home as well, they did a lot of things where they kind of played their B team, I would say. For example, benching Igor Thiago, and kind of setting up in a way where they just almost wanted to negate the fixture, to play as negative as possible. And it didn't really work out, right? Like, Gruda did not have a good game. Minte actually came on in the second half, and I was actually really positive about his performance. And I think less so in terms of how well Minte played versus Arsenal, because Minte seems to play very well versus top teams. Like, I think the Liverpool performance was actually relatively good for Minte, but I think the takeaway there is that they just don't really have serious depth in that position. That would mean that Minte's minutes are going to be that precarious in the future. I just think that you should not be worried as a Minte owner. I would actually come off of that Arsenal performance actually feeling quite happy about owning Minte. Otherwise, Arsenal kind of still feels like the team where I don't think the attacking ceiling is, extraordinary, unfortunately. But players like Saka, players like Rice are just a crucial cog in that team, and they're still going to have value. So I think I've been underrating Rice a little bit all season long. Fair enough. I apologize, to Declan Rice. But yeah, I mean, he's great. Arsenal defense, I still think, is quite great. Yes, of course, they kind of gave away a chance to Brighton, and conceded off the back of it with a Diego Gomez sort of rebound goal. But I still think Arsenal defense is very strong. And I think the main positive is Gabriel's back. Otherwise, though, I think Calafiori and Timber are massive misses on attack. But I don't think Declan Rice, in terms of the sort of role that he kind of played in that sort of right mid-ish type role, did poor whatsoever. I think he was exceptional. Brentford versus Bournemouth. I didn't actually watch this game, but I saw the XG. Both teams, I think, were not trying to defend in this match, and I think Sade had 2.78 XG. I mean, I can't explain how insane that is for a non-center forward, but he also, to be honest, if you watch Brentford at times, is sort of the second center forward of the team. Like, if you even cast your eyes back to, let's say, his goal versus Chelsea earlier in the season, that's because many instances he is the last man of the team. It's not like Thiago actually has the pace to run in behind. So, Shadi at times can play like a center forward, and I think in the structure he is one. Is he still a great pick? Yeah. I mean, he's been a green option on the cheat sheet the whole time. So feel a bit proud to see Shadi do well, and actually some of my friends and managers like Mark who have gotten Shadi's hat trick. So congratulations to all those managers in the world. As far as Burnley versus Everton, as I said, I think Everton were very lucky to keep a clean sheet. So were Burnley. So it's kind of one of those cases where I think two teams don't have a lot of quality. You saw Grealish out the squad. You saw Everton's team. I think Dibbling looked pretty good, actually. But, I mean, it's one of those cases where people create chances, but the quality of the players probably mean that they weren't converted on that match. Other than that, Michael Keane, 20 DEFCON, Tarkowski, 12. I mean, Keane just looks like an extremely valuable option until Branthwaite is back. But I think the issue now is when you look at a player like Keane is how much can you squeeze out of the bottle, and I think it's a little bit too late now for managers. So Tarkowski still probably makes the most sense. Liverpool versus Wolves. As I said at the start of the video, I think Liverpool are just shocking as a team, like in the sense that I've never seen a team that has such a positive, I guess, ability with the sort of players that they have to create chances, then really struggle to consolidate on leads or to, build upon them and to I mean, even, for example, have the opportunity, like United did to an extent, to just kind of make the game and even more chaotic and to benefit from that, especially with the better players that you have. So, when you look at United, sure they conceded, I think, off a Bellegarde goal in the first half when they played versus Wolves, and they still, for example, created so many chances in the second half and sort of overwhelmed Wolves, anyways, by sheer quality. And so when a team like Wolves gives you that many chances to do well, I would expect a bit more. And unfortunately, we don't really see it from Liverpool. I think Wirtz had a great game, but am I really confident about Wirtz at all as a pick going forwards? Not quite, which is why I think I was quite hesitant to make him a green option on the cheat sheet, despite how appealing the game was. Was the XGI incredible? Sure. But Ekitike actually created that chance entirely himself, as opposed to, like the classic situation of what we're thinking about in terms of Wirtz as a profile, where he's maybe a little bit of a game breaker and a bit of a creator there, as opposed to sort of being a last man who is getting fed off the ball by a striker who has many, many talents like Ekitike. West Ham versus Fulham. Let's just see how West Ham perform going forwards. I do think they're a touch overrated as a team in terms of like how we sort of evaluate their attack and defense. They still haven't really been a much improved side under Nuno, and I think performances like these are maybe indicative of this. I don't think Fulham, for example, were completely battering West Ham. That's not the point that I'm trying to make, but I think it's more the suggestion that I'm not sure still if there's that much quality within West Ham. And we know that they're losing a couple of players as well for AFCON. And so are Fulham. But Fulham have actually looked pretty good as a defense. And maybe, Bassey out is actually just a positive, to be honest. We'll see how this sort of tracks going forwards. As I said, I might consider playing Anderson. But some of the defensive underlying stats for the small 2-game sample versus two relatively easy opponents to play from that perspective, right? Like the odds for West Ham or Nottingham Forest were never going to be that high in terms of the expected goals, but Cuenca's looked fantastic, and I think actually Bassey's could have struggled to come back into the side. Chelsea versus Villa, I actually struggled to sort of think about, how do I even come across genuinely about some of Villa's recent performances? You just have to kind of give your hat off to them. I mean, like they just score. They're a chaotic team. Like they will always build chances. They will always give themselves the opportunity to create shots against opponents, and they've just won every single game, I guess, down on XG recently, other than, I think, let's say the Arsenal performance and the Brighton performance. But I mean, you just kind of have to give credit to them. I guess they do have quality players, and it's more of a fair enough thing for me than anything. I do think Chelsea's almost like second layer squad or level squad when Palmer's off the pitch, when Delap comes on the pitch, is a significantly worse team. So yeah, that's probably my only takeaway from Chelsea. Otherwise, this is sort of the game week as it stands, and we're just going to jump right into my transfer plans. Okay, so we're back here with the My Team pick and rating tool. This is Fantasy Football Hub's My Team pick and rating tool, which you can access within the link in the description below. They've got a Christmas offer right now, which is if you sign up and don't get a rank rise up until January the 7th, you will get a full free season off. So do look at that offer, because it actually gives you an access towards a wide array of tools, and you can still stand to benefit a lot if you don't think you're actually getting the rank rises you deserve. So this is one of the tools. Let's just jump into My Team. As I said, every single week, the purpose of this tool to me is to make sure that week on week, I'm sort of putting a good enough team, and that I don't feel too bad about the team as it stands. Right now, I think Hincapie's minutes are a little bit underrated, so obviously the model will just need to kind of adjust towards the new impacts, right? So sure, Gabriel's back, but at the same time, Calafiori's injured, Timber might be injured, and we don't really know what the situation is of, like White's timeline, I guess, probably still a month out from this point. And yeah, I don't think Miles Lewis-Skelly is going to start over Hincapie. So we kind of have a free route towards having an Arsenal defender, which I think is a little bit underrated here. I think this is actually a really decent week on paper. As you can see with Gabriel's sort of points expectations, very, very high. I would expect something a little bit less for Hincapie, but I think this is a positive. The only concern that I have with Hincapie when he plays left back is I don't think he's very good at DEFCON at that position, and we've seen in previous matches that he's been really good at DEFCON. So let's just see kind of how that tracks going forwards. No massive complaints, but I feel like obviously the sticking point in this team here is Semenyo. Like sure, Semenyo has great points projections here in this week, but I still think that maybe he's a problem for my team. And if I can actually have Hincapie starting here, I can play 4-4-2 very easily. I don't have to play Lefebvre. So something to think about from that context. I do think that for Semenyo to go out really the only option that I'd be bringing in is going to be Szoboszlai. I can't really trust Gakpo's minutes. He's just coming back from an injury. So I'm struggling to see how he's going to play significant minutes versus Leeds at home. Whereas Szoboszlai is actually fit, right? He's actually been excused. And he had an ankle injury, I think, 2 weeks ago, but now is seemingly quite fit. So I kind of like the idea of bringing Sobo. He's cheaper as well towards Bruno G. But the alternative option within the midfield would actually be Anthony Gordon, right? Anthony Gordon is on pens. I think he's better than Bruno G. I know the model kind of disagrees with me here, but I think Gordon, his minutes actually look pretty good. Playing 90 minutes versus Man United, I think is a huge positive. Is he going to play 90 minutes every match? Absolutely not. I think he's going to get rotated, and especially because if you're going to, let's say, run a specific player into the ground for 90 minutes and then you still are engaged in multiple other fixtures after that, you know that player is most likely going to get managed minutes post that performance. So I quite like Sobo here because he tends to play all the games anyways, whereas Gordon is someone who still, at the end of the day, has his minutes managed from time to time. So I would go Sobo here if I was to make a midfield transfer. Now, this gives me 2.7 million in the bank. What am I going to do with 2.7 million in the bank? Which is a great question. I'm not sure right now. I think the key thing is sort of assessing how long can I squeeze Hincapié as a player within my team. How much money do I need to get to some of the picks that I like in the future? I think the way that I see it is I can either go Hincapié into an Arsenal player, or I can move him eventually later down the line into maybe a Newcastle defender, maybe a Chelsea defender, someone like a Chalobah, for example, who's just been an exceptional pick. This is also a game week to go for a defender, and we'll talk about defender transfers in a moment. But I think Semenyo out makes sense, especially knowing that he's unlikely to be a consistent option for me from an FPL point of view. Past game week 19 really. So game week 20 and beyond, I'm not really sure I can get much value from Semenyo. The only problem with Sobo, I think, is what that means for my team in game week 20, right? So let's say I can still squeeze Hincapié in game week 20. That would be nice versus Bournemouth away. But I think in game week 21, the problem is going to be, what does this team look like when I have so many Liverpool players, so many Arsenal players as well? I would still have Sobo and Ekitike in game week 21. And I think the unfortunate thing is that this is not a particular game week where we want to suddenly move into Palmer because it's Fulham away and it's not a particularly great game. I might as well just keep Ekitike and Sobo. It is Arsenal away though, so I think that the questions probably in 2 game weeks' time is, are there any other forwards that I'm interested in? Would I move out of Ekitike or would I move out of Sobo? Or do I just kind of admit that sometimes in FPL you're just going to have a really, really bad FPL team sometimes, but for the greater good, I might be able to get away with something like this. Sure, I think I can make a couple defensive transfers in and around 21, but I think the problem, will be that my team in 21, it does just look diabolical. Richards would be a nice play, though, so I can definitely see myself playing some sort of 4-4-2, benching potentially, let's say, a Szoboszlai, maybe even playing Lefay over him, as long as Lefay doesn't have that sort of suspension threat. So that could be an option, and is something that I'm kind of actively thinking about. Like, does going for Sobo mean that I'm making my team significantly worse? Or do I move into, let's say, someone like a Gordon, who's not too far off in terms of price point, but probably closes me off from some of the more interesting transfers, is kind of the question that I have. So say I go Sobo now. What I like about the Sobo pick actually is what happens in game week 22, where if I was able to roll all the free transfers for some odd reason, let's say Calafiori's injury is kind of extended, Hincapié is still playing football for Arsenal at this time, I think the main benefit that I'd be able to receive here, and I can optimize my team for this week, is I could do something like Cunha, straight into Palmer. I've saved all the money in the bank. Hopefully Palmer's not going to get 3 price rises then. I think Cunha is getting price rises, so he can clearly be a good cash cow. And I think this team's actually really solid, right? This is all due to me going for Sobo at a cheaper price at 6.6. If, let's say, I went for a Gordon, or if I went for a Bruno G, or someone even more expensive, the problem is I don't have this easy access of, jumping off of Cunha versus City into just simply going for a Cole Palmer here in a great game versus Brentford at home. This is why I think this transfer plan is the most elegant. It still kind of requires a bit of a leap of faith here, which is, to say that Hincapié is going to be fine, Keane's going to be fine, no issues from Branthwaite, no issues from the rest of the Arsenal team. But it is plausible that it could work out. Like, I don't know. I mean, there could be injury setbacks to Gabriel. There could be injury setbacks to, how long Calafiori's out for, how long Timber's out for, and what that means for the team and how they have to line up. So this is something that I'm actively thinking about at this moment in time. And I think this transfer could work out just because of how fortunate I've been with the kind of injury situation as discussed with Arsenal. So the other thing too is I guess, this team doesn't necessarily have the facilities to go Hincapié into Gabriel. And a lot of people will be going to Gabriel. So my question will always be, how do I eventually move this team into Gabriel? I think there's two ways in the sense that Krupi Jr. can always go down to Gu, and that will give me money. And that should hopefully sort of, in the net give me enough, or rather Obi, because I think Gu is now 4.3 million and Obi is 4.2. But that, in a sense, can give me Gabriel, who's now fortunately quite cheap at 6.2. But still, I'm a little bit ways away from him in terms of price point. So it might even have to be, I don't know, even considering, like, let's say dropping Raya into John. Like that could be something that I do later down the line, where if I just need cash and I kind of want to redistribute my funds within the team, Krupi out gives me very little back. But Raya into a John, if John is going to consistently start for Nottingham Forest, is going to be massive, because this is a player who, a double 8 million goalkeeper pairing is plausible right now in FPL. I don't think Nottingham Forest are that amazing, but the big pro here is you do save a lot of money, and then suddenly everything is sort of available to me, and I can even go double Arsenal sort of in the outfield. So that's these are kind of ideas that I'm thinking about. But I think if I have, let's say, a general transfer path in mind, I think it is Palmer on 22. It is Semenyo out, unfortunately, in Game Week 19. If I was to, let's say, not do that, I think my alternative path is to maybe make a defensive transfer. A tight move that I could also make is simply Enzo Lefebvre back into Szoboszlai. I don't really like this move for the purpose of just kind of hokey coking players in. I think Semenyo is going to be a problem, which is why I like transferring him out. It doesn't need to be versus this week specifically, right? Like, for example, if I don't like Sobo as a pick, and I don't really like even making the move towards Sobo, I could just delay the Semenyo move until next week, which is something that I can consider. And instead this week, I can just maybe attack the game week, especially if I think Richards is going to miss out on this match. Like, I think I could go Dorgu. This could give me like as much money in the bank as possible. And I can really play around with the moves that I have. I think Hall is also a really good pick, alongside Malik Teo as well. These are both great options, and Teo is actually a bit cheaper. The last defender that I'm thinking about is, obviously a Virgil van Dijk, but at this point, I'm kind of sick of it. I don't have any interest in Liverpool whatsoever. So to me, those are the types of defensive moves that I can actually make, and maybe Dalot as well is another interesting option, just to throw his name in there, because I do think that his permanence of minutes are likely going to be much better than Dorgu's. But at the same time, you probably only care about United for the next three, right? So if you're thinking right winger Dorgu with good minutes versus Wolves at home, Leeds away, and Burnley away, and that's all I'm ever going to get from him, well, I think that's fantastic for Dorgu, right? So that could work out really, really well too. So that's another path that I'm considering. So let's just say I go Dorgu. Once again, Hincapié kind of is going to play over these weeks, so I don't think my team looks as bad as it is. The team looks really good in Game Week 20. The team also looks pretty good in Game Week 21. So, it is possible that I could hobble along to Game Week 22, but as we said, Semenyo is a bit fake, right? So I do need to kind of address Semenyo here in Game Week 20, and I think probably the question mark here is, once again, do I want to reconsider some of these Liverpool options? Maybe actually Sobo is not the one, and maybe Gakpo is available to me, and he could be quite interesting. Or, if we're really confident in Wirtz at this point, like, I could just go Wirtz, I guess, on Game Week 20. This would mean that I miss Leeds at home, which I don't think is something that I'm interested in, but Fulham away is not the worst fixture in the world. And then you still get Burnley at home with whatever Liverpool player you go for, let's say here in Game Week 20. So, something that I've been thinking about is, do I just maybe get a little bit more information? Do I wait for Gordon to see if he actually starts within a midweek match and actually just seems like his minutes are perfect? Or, do I make some other moves? And so that's kind of the tricky thing for me, I think, in the midfield, where I kind of just like going Sabo earlier, because I also don't really know what other mids to go for. I don't have, for example, let's say the option to go Turkey at this point in time. It just costs too many moves. I don't really have the free transfers to allow myself to do it. So maybe it's also just a bit of a Rodgers waiting room too. Like, for example, if let's say I got towards game week 20 and I actually made a defensive transfer in game week 19, Rodgers is probably the most logical transfer. It does sort of require a lot of belief, I guess, in terms of like how good Rodgers really is as a player, because he is the classic poster boy for, I think, someone having an absolutely wonderful season, which has happened before, right? Like Odegaard is a good example, I think, of someone who didn't have great underlying stats a couple seasons ago, but just simply had an absurd sort of finishing season. And I do think Rodgers feels like that frame of player. So maybe this is just the season to go for Rodgers. And maybe we can also just reassess after Arsenal. But I suppose giving myself a defender transfer in Game Week 19 gives me the flexibility to consider Rodgers on 20. And so that's kind of where I'm at in terms of my transfer plans. If I go for Rodgers, I think it does make, going for Palmer a little bit more complicated, because it does sort of require me to, instead of, let's say, making one free transfer towards Cunha to Palmer in Game Week 22, I do need to be thinking about, okay, how do I reduce more money from this team? Potentially it's, once again, selling Ekitike, unfortunately. But does it make sense in Game Week 22 when he's got Burnley at home? Probably not. So it's kind of like an inelegant situation, I think, if I make a defender transfer this week. I do think Semenyo to Sabo probably makes the most sense, because it also gives me the most flexibility with my team going forwards. But that's going to be it for now in terms of my transfer plans. Let me know what your thoughts are. Are you making a defender transfer? Are you actually making a midfield transfer? Or maybe, are you still sort of catching up on some forward transfers, maybe doing something a little bit different from the rest of the path and the slate? So would love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you guys soon.